Series on the 5 acts of worship. We had gotten through singing, praying, and the communion or the Lord's Supper, and we're getting back into it with giving. And we've been looking at these 5 acts of worship from a slightly different angle than they're usually looked at, which they're usually looked at from the perspective of the formal worship service. People actually gathering together on the Lord's Day and worshiping God in a formal setting. But we've been looking at them from a perspective of how are you supposed to incorporate this act of worship into everyday life? And so we're going to be looking this morning at a perspective of giving from the perspective of a giving heart. Because we are supposed to be a people who gives with their whole heart. A people who give all of themselves to God. Not just some of themselves, not just the worst or best bits of themselves, but all of themselves. We're going to be looking at it from the perspective of Luke chapter 21, which is the bit of scripture in today's bulletin. And he looked up and saw the rich putting in their gifts into the treasury. And he also saw a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. So he said, "Truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all, for all of these out of their abundance have put in offerings for God, but she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had." And Jesus is trying to teach us something by taking note of this widow. She puts in 2 mites into the treasury of the temple. And this box that she's putting into is not the temple tax. This box is a free will offering to God that people could make after worshiping God in the temple. This is a collection box of sorts for after the temple tax of 10%. And you have all of these wealthy people putting in lots of gifts to the treasury. And then you have this poor widow, and all she has left is 2 mites. Now, the purchasing power of these 2 mites is probably a little bit more than we sometimes give it credit for. Some people compare it to pennies. But in rough terms of purchasing power, you can think of this more as about $10 or $20. It's enough to buy about a meal for her and her family. But she puts it into the temple box. And it gives us the question, as Jesus points out, what does it mean to give yourself to God? Because there's a lot more to give than just money. To have a giving heart, we first need to give ourselves, which is what this widow has done. This widow has first given herself to God. She's given herself to God, she's given herself to her family, to her community, and to her congregation. In this case, the temple. As we consider how we give ourselves to our family, the question is not, what is our family, what does our family give to us, but what do we bring to the table? What have we to give to others? A good question to sort of ask yourself as you engage in relationships with other people is, how much of the golden rule are you following? This is the golden rule for every relationship. Do unto others what you would have them do for you. And it's not predicated on them doing the things you want them to be doing first. It's predicated on you doing the things for them that you would want them to do for you. And without holding a grudge about it. Unbegrudgingly. Because relationships are much better when they're not solely when you are not solely preoccupied with what you're receiving, but much more concerned with what you're giving. Because you can keep tabs all day about this failure or that failure on the part of the other person, but if you're much more concerned with what you're putting into the relationship, that breeds contentment and not just contentment, but even gratitude, because you're not expecting anything. And so anything that the other person brings to the table, anything that the other person gives you that's unexpected, it's nice, it's pleasant. You need to give yourself to your community. Are you determined to show love around your community? Do your neighbors know that you care? And I don't mean your immediate neighbors, the person to the left and right of you on the street, or even the person across from you. I mean everyone in your community. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. Who is my neighbor? Well, who is neighbor to the man who was beaten on the side of the road and left for dead by robbers? Well, it's the Samaritan who picked him up and took him to an inn and nursed him and paid for his room. Right? That was neighborly. Well, who is your neighbor? It's whoever you show neighborliness to. And your entire community is a good place to start. You need to give yourself to your congregation. Are you interested in being there for others? Or are you putting yourself out there to be there for the people of your congregation? I spent 3 weeks kind of talking about that, so I don't want to I want to keep beating a dead horse. But a congregation is to be like a family. And like we just covered with a family, the best question to ask is not what am I receiving out of it, but what am I putting into it? Are we loving our fellow Christians like a family should love each other? Are we concerned with the agape and phileo that we're showing each other? And that's general goodwill, an active love, and phileo, which is brotherly love, but like a brotherhood kind of idea, not a family idea. That's a deep friendship, one could say. And both of those ought to be present in the church. And they ought to be present in our families and our community. And this poor widow has demonstrated all of that, and that she is more concerned with making sure that the temple has her two mites than she is concerned about what the temple has given her and her family. Now, to be clear, under the law of Moses, the temple ought to be taking care of her family. But this widow has not expected that. She has instead asked herself what she can give to her community. She gives her time. You know, this widow could have made all the excuses in the world for why she needed to not be at the temple that day or the synagogue. She could have come up with an excuse of, well, she needs to go and make some money to feed her family and take care of them. But instead, she's decided to give her time to the Lord. And there's a myriad of ways to do that. The one that she's choosing to engage in at the moment is that she is worshiping God, but you could spend time in study, in prayer, could spend time fasting, could spend time talking to others about the church. You could give your time to the Lord by engaging in work, in teaching, but we need to be giving our time to the Lord. We need to give our time to salvation. Are we working on ourselves? I know I've brought it up occasionally, and it's such a great point. In biology, which is, if I hadn't become a preacher, I probably would have become a biologist. I don't know what of, but I just really love the study of biology. But in biology, there is this sort of a law. It's at least a truism. If something is not growing, then it is dying. And biologists have observed this in just about every organism on Earth. The reason the redwood trees live so long is because they continue to grow year after year after year after year. They're always growing. That's why they're, one, so tall, and two, so old. The tortoises that you hear about that are ancient and live to be 200 to 300 years, they're also constantly growing. That's their secret. They don't have a maximum age. They have a maximum size. There's a shark in Greenland, apparently, called the Greenland shark, because it's very original. It lives down in depths, and everyone talks about, the great whites being huge. The Greenland shark can get up to about twice the length and size of a great white, but it lives down so deep we never see it, but they live to be almost 500 years old. There are sharks today older than this country. But their secret is that they don't stop growing. This even applies true for colonies of things. If you have a bacteria that organizes itself into colonies, that colony begins to die off once it stops growing, and then it starts losing members, and then that colony is gone. That's how things keep alive. It's even true anthropologically. Most of the time, nations that stop growing begin their period of decline. Now, that growth can be financially, it can be territorial, it can be production, but as long as the country is growing, it's not yet in its period of decline and decay. Well, the same is true of spiritual life. If the spiritual life is not growing, if it's not maturing, if it's not becoming better and greater, then that spiritual life is dying. It's true, by the way, of humans too. Technically, you begin the process of dying at about age 18 or 19 once you stop growing. It takes us a long time. But we need to give our time to salvation. Are we working on ourselves? Because we always have room to grow, nurture that growth, and to continue growing. Because if we're not growing spiritually, then we're dying spiritually. Because we need to give our time to be there. And I mean to be there for others, because Good Samaritans are only forged with time. You don't suddenly wake up with all the virtue of the Good Samaritan from the parable. You work on yourself to the degree where you can recognize people's problems and then encounter them and deal with their problems. That's how you become a Good Samaritan. Time and discipline are the only methods of growth that will actually work in the long run. And in order to do that, we have to give ourselves to Jesus. I have here Galatians chapter 2. Galatians chapter 2, verses 19 through 21. For I, through the law, died to the law that I might live to God. I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. In the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died in vain. Now, I could preach an entire sermon on this, so I'm not going to get super lost into the weeds here. But what I want to focus on is that part of what Paul is saying is that to give himself purpose, he had to die to himself. He had to make his purpose Christ's purpose. And that's the only way that a Christian is able to give everything to Christ. Your life, once you are baptized, once you're a Christian, once you're on the path of salvation, your life is now purposed towards the rescue of souls. Now, that can be your soul, that can be your children's soul, that can be your community's souls, that can be souls halfway across the world. But your life is now purposed towards the rescue of souls. And your purpose is to teach and to grow Christians. And that can be teaching yourself. Presumably that's first. That can be teaching your children. That can be teaching those in your community. That can be teaching your fellow Christians. That can be teaching, like I said, people across the world on the other side. That can be people across the river in Iowa. Wherever it is, it's your purpose is now to teach and to grow Christians. Because we're to give our life. Jesus is the author of our life now. There's no room to stop because Jesus did not stop. As I was writing this part, I was thinking about the book of Joshua. And I want to be very clear on this. I think Joshua from the book of Joshua was a great man. And he is a great leader of Israel. And if I had to pick one thing he did wrong, he stopped. Now, God told him to take a break at the end of the book of Joshua. But Joshua took that break for 12 years and then passed away. And I don't think that's quite what God meant about taking a break and stopping and enjoying the fruits of what he'd done. There was still more of the land to conquer. There were still more places for them to rout out the evil. And 12 years, even with a 4-year break, would have been plenty of time to finish the job. And I realize I'm picking on like a 90-year-old man when he stopped. But kind of like Moses, he was given sort of a supernatural youth about him, where just like Moses, it said that he was still about as hardy and strong as he had been when he was 20 or 30, when he's in his 90s there. And I don't want to say that there's anything wrong with taking breaks. There's obviously nothing wrong with taking breaks. God established the Sabbath for a reason. He told Joshua to take a break for a reason. But you don't get to stop working just because breaks are allowed. You have to give your all. Our goal is to give as much to God as we can. From our lives, to our children, to our time, to our very reputations, we must be careful and ever diligent to make sure that we're giving as much as we should be. See, the widow and her 2 mites teaches us something very important, and it is about the money. It's not about percentages of wealth dropped into the money box. You know, as often pointed out, the widow dropped 100% of what she had in the money box. And that's true mathematically. But it's not about the money and the percentage of it. There's no command in the New Testament to give 10%. Tithing is an Old Testament ideal. Instead, the command is to give ourselves fully to Christ, which is a much, much higher calling than counting out 10% of your mint leaves and your cumin. Instead, it's about how we need to give our hearts to God first. Well, then we can talk about the amount of money that we're giving. That's sort of irrelevant. It isn't about percentages as much as it's about the spirit in which we give. Because if we have not given ourselves to Christ, we haven't given ourselves to God, the amount of money we drop in the collection plate is irrelevant. It can be 90 or 100%, but if you haven't given yourself to God, then it's of no consequence to you. This morning, as we close up, we need to ask ourselves the question of how much of ourselves have we given to God? Have we given as much as we can or as much as we should? How much are we giving to our fellow Christians? How much more can we give? There's probably something somewhere that we're not doing as much as we should. I know there's places where I need to step up in the home. There's places I need to step up in the church. But we need to first give ourselves over to God. Is anyone here who needs to begin that walk of giving themselves to God? If you need prayers, if there's any way that we can help you, there is an invitation to put on Christ in baptism for the renewal of our souls. Is there anyone here who needs to respond to that invitation? If you need prayers, if there's any way the church here can help, we do urge you to come forward as we stand and sing our invitation song.